adult children choose wife's rich affair partner over me and left me with wife as I was in the hospital. But turns out the affair partner wanted nothing to do with the kids and was just using them to get closer to the wife. Now they demand I continue acting as if nothing happened and expect to be included in the inheritance. I laugh at their faces. So I, Andy, 55 male, have been married to my wife Linda, 52 female, for almost 30 odd years. We have 2 grown children, Mia, 29 female, and Matthew, 27 male. Up until about a year ago, I thought we had a pretty good life. We weren't super rich, but we were comfortable. Our kids were doing well. And Linda and I, well, we weren't exactly setting the world on fire, but we had a good routine going. Then last month, I hit rock bottom. Got rushed to the hospital with a heart attack, the whole 9 yards. It scared the living daylights out of me, but thankfully the surgery went well. I was supposed to be in the hospital for a week, then another few weeks of recovery at home. Here's where things got messy. While I was stuck in the hospital room, hooked up to all sorts of machines, Linda never left my side. Or so I had thought. It turned out that while I was fighting for my life, she was fighting a different battle, guilt. A few days after my heart surgery, Linda confessed to having an affair. It hit me like a ton of bricks because here I was, facing down my mortality, and my wife was dropping this bombshell. The worst part of it wasn't some random fling. It was this young, successful lawyer she met at a charity event. His name was John. The why behind the affair is still a bit of a blur to me. Linda, bless her soul, isn't exactly the most forthcoming person, so she didn't share much more than was necessary. But from what I could gather, it was because she had felt neglected, said I was too focused on work, and that the spark had gone out of our marriage. I won't lie to you, there's probably some truth to that. We hadn't exactly been having date nights every week lately, but an affair, that was a low blow. Anyway, after her whole confession, Linda became this picture of devotion. She would stay by my side, hold my hand, and tell me stories about her day, which in hindsight were suspiciously devoid of any mention of John. I was still weak, recovering, and frankly too emotionally drained to delve any deeper into that. I just wanted to focus on getting better. Then came the day that I was supposed to have my physical evaluation. The doctor checked everything and gave me the green light to be discharged. And I was looking forward to going home, finally getting some proper rest, eating normal food again, and maybe even starting some light physical therapy. But when I got back to my room, it was empty. I waited a few hours. No Linda. Neither of my kids was there either. Just a sterile silence that felt heavier than the machines I was just freed from. So I called Linda, no answer. I called Mia and Matthew, same story. Panic started to set in. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Matthew picked up. His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. He told me that they were quote-unquote busy and couldn't make it to pick me up. Busy with what, I demanded. That's when the truth came out. Matthew, in a shaky voice, told me that they were with John, at John's house, celebrating. Celebrating what, I don't even know. My supposed recovery? My wife's infidelity? Supposedly it was his win on a new case. The betrayal cut deep. My own children, the people whom I had thought I could always count on, choosing their mother's affair partner over me, their father, who was literally fighting for his life just days ago. The anger, the hurt, it was overwhelming. I hung up on Matthew, tears blurring my vision. The hospital staff, bless their hearts, saw the whole thing unfold. They helped me contact a friend, who thankfully lived nearby and came to pick me up. I spent the next few days recuperating at his place, feeling utterly alone and abandoned. As for Linda and the kids, they eventually reached out, sheepishly apologizing for what had happened, but what pissed me off the most was that they made it sound like they'd forgotten to pick up milk, not abandoned their father and husband in his time of need. The next few weeks were a blur of therapy sessions, awkward family dinners, and a whole lot of unspoken resentment. Linda, to her credit, tried to make amends for everything. She cut off all contact with John and swore it was a one-time thing, a moment of weakness. Did I believe her? Honestly, I don't know. A part of me wanted to, for the sake of our marriage, for the sake of some semblance of normalcy. But the other part, the hurt and betrayed part, couldn't be ignored. It gnawed at me, even when I tried to put on a brave face for the kids. Mia and Matthew, bless their naive hearts, thought everything could just go back to the way things were, as if their little escapade with John hadn't shattered my trust in them. The worst part is, they treated Linda like the victim, not the woman who had broken her vows and risked our entire family, but the one who had been wronged. They fussed over her and asked her how she was doing, completely oblivious to the emotional minefield she had laid out for me. Maybe they thought if they ignored the affair, it would just disappear. Fast forward a couple of more weeks, we were all at a family dinner, our first of the month. We were having a polite conversation, avoiding the giant elephant in the room, which, let's be honest, was our shared family dynamic, when Mia suddenly brought up the inheritance. My ears perked up. Inheritance? Was she serious? I'd barely begun recovering and putting the pieces of my life back together, and she was already thinking about divvying up the spoils after my death. My anger started to simmer. Matthew, sensing my mood, tried to steer the conversation away, but Mia, bless her tactless heart, wouldn't let it go. She said something along the lines of, "Mom and Dad, you should really start thinking about setting up a will. It would make things so much easier for us when the time comes." The time comes. My anger boiled over, and I couldn't contain it anymore. I'd said something like, "Time comes for what, Mia? You and Matthew are figuring out how much John is going to leave you in his will, since you apparently think he's more important to you." The room erupted. Linda went pale. Mia started sputtering some justification about caring for your children, and Matthew looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. And me, I felt a grim of satisfaction at finally calling them out. For the longest time, I had kept things civil for the sake of appearances, tried to be the bigger person, to smooth things over. But in that moment, I couldn't hold back the hurt, the anger, and the betrayal. So I told them exactly how their actions had made me feel, how their loyalty to John had cut deeper than any betrayal Linda could have inflicted. Linda half-heartedly tried to apologize, mumbling something about being scared and not knowing what to do. Mia got defensive, saying that they were only doing what they thought was best for all of them. Matthew, to his credit, at least looked partially ashamed. But the damage was done. The rift between us had grown too wide. I made it crystal clear that while I would always love them, they shouldn't expect any special treatment when it came to inheritance, because they wouldn't be getting anything. They chose their path. Now they had to deal with the consequences. That was a few weeks ago. Things are still strained, to say the least. Linda and I have decided to stay together for now. We're going through counseling, trying to rebuild some semblance of trust. But it's not easy. And Mia and Matthew, they barely talk to me anymore. Unless it's for a perfunctory call or holiday greeting. It's honestly heartbreaking. Part of me misses them, misses the family we used to be. But a bigger part of me refuses to just forget what they did. They act like everything is fine. Am I the a-hole for basically laughing in their faces when they started talking about inheritance? Maybe I'm being petty. Maybe I should just let it go. But honestly, after everything, they can't seriously expect me to leave them a hefty chunk of change, right? Well folks, remember that post where I asked if I was the a-hole for laughing at my kids when they brought up their inheritance? Yeah, well, seems like the story continues, and man, has it taken a wild turn. First, the fallout from my outburst. To say Mia and Matthew weren't happy would be the understatement of the century. They accused me of being vindictive, of holding a grudge, of trying to punish them. Honestly, I'm still not entirely sure what their logic was. I mean, choosing to go celebrate with your mom's affair partner over being there to bring your recovering father home from the hospital isn't exactly something you get a gold star for. Linda, bless her heart, tried to play peacemaker. She talked to the kids and tried to reason with them, explaining how deeply their actions had hurt me. They listened and offered some half-hearted apologies, but I could tell that the resentment still lingered. Things between me and the kids deteriorated even further after that. It became painfully obvious that the relationship was too damaged. Our conversations were strained, stilted, and filled with unspoken tension. We were basically just going through the motions, pretending to be a functional family. Then a couple of weeks ago, another bombshell dropped. Remember John, the dashing young lawyer who stole Linda's heart, and apparently her common sense? Well, guess who made a surprise reappearance? Linda confessed that he had reached out to her, apologizing, begging for forgiveness, swearing he was a changed man, and just wanted to be friends again. You know, the whole 9 yards. She was conflicted, clearly struggling to figure out what to do. Part of her was intrigued, drawn to the forbidden fruit. The other part, the part still clinging to some semblance of loyalty to me, was hesitant. I was livid, of course. The audacity of the guy to waltz back into our lives after everything he had done, after he had so gleefully seduced our family into dysfunction. I forbade Linda from even speaking to him, or to just forget about fixing things between us. Big mistake. Turns out, forbidding Linda from doing something is just a motivational pep talk for her to do it anyway. Over the next few weeks, fueled by, I don't know, secrecy and a desire for something, anything, to relieve the boredom of her life, Linda fell back into John's clutches. At first, it was just innocent phone calls and a few late-night texts. Then coincidental run-ins at that charity function they both frequented. And now, it turns out they've been having clandestine meetings for weeks. How do I know this? Well, let's just say our kids Mia and Matthew, despite their newfound resentment towards me, still maintain some shred of guilt. Mia, in a moment of either conscience or desire to see her mom exposed and her life burned down, I haven't quite figured out which, confessed everything. Linda denied it at first, tried to spin it as a harmless friendship, but John simply reached out and she didn't want to be rude. But when faced with the evidence Mia had gathered, apparently spying on her mom has become her new hobby, Linda crumbled. And that brings us to today. Well, yesterday technically. After the reveal, I went through the usual stages of fury, despair, and a strange sense of weary amusement. Linda was a mess. She tearfully promised to cut things off with John again, saying she had finally realized how much she values our marriage. I don't buy it, not for a second. After all that she's done. It wasn't just the routine of a marriage that was broken. It was trust. But here's the question. Do I even want to salvage what's left of our relationship this time? I don't think I've quite figured out the answer to that. Things have been moving fast, folks. Like, faster than an out-of-control semi-hurtling down a mountain fast. The whole thing about Linda's renewed, friendship with John sent me into a tailspin. It was as if all the progress I'd made in therapy and all the forced normalcy I'd built up came crashing down. I spent a few sleepless nights trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to kick Linda out of the house, change the locks, and burn every photo album that had her face in it. The other part, the weary and heartbroken part, just wanted this nightmare to end. After a lot of thought, I made one of the smartest decisions of my life. I hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a ruthless, shark-faced attorney who specializes in messy divorces that a friend of mine introduced me to. His name is Michael, and let's just say the man has the empathy of a crocodile. But in my current predicament, that felt pretty fitting. Michael laid out my options, which were grim to say the least. Linda, fueled by some combination of midlife crisis and misplaced loyalty, was determined to see this John thing through. Consequences be damned. She was ready to walk away from our marriage, from 2.5 decades of building this family together, for a guy who had already proven himself untrustworthy. But here's where things get juicy. Michael, bless his greedy heart, discovered something interesting while digging through our finances. It turns out that a substantial portion of our savings account, you know, the one I worked my entire life to build for our retirement, was suspiciously depleted. Further sleuthing revealed lavish purchases on Linda's credit cards, purchases she conveniently forgot to mention. Suddenly, John's renewed interest didn't seem so innocent anymore. It looked an awful lot like Linda was falling for a good old-fashioned honey trap. As it turns out, John's legal practice wasn't exactly flourishing, and he was drowning in debt. So much for the successful lawyer persona. Confronting Linda about the money didn't exactly go well. She went pale, spluttered denials at first, then dissolved into tears. It was her typical pattern. Amidst the sobs, she admitted that John had been pressuring her for money, claiming to be going through some temporary financial trouble. Blinded by infatuation or sheer stupidity, I don't know, she had given some money to him, believing that he would pay her back. That was our retirement fund. My retirement fund. Decades of hard work poured into the pockets of some sleazy conman. The rage that coursed through me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. Meanwhile, me and Matthew have taken a spectacular U-turn, realizing that their precious John might leach their inheritance from their mother. They've started playing the Concerned Children's Act, coming over for tearful talks, trying to convince their mother that this was all a big mistake. For once, I found myself on the same side as my kids. The irony isn't lost on me. I have kicked Linda out of the house, at least for now. Michael is filing for divorce and drafting an ironclad agreement designed to squeeze John, and by association Linda dry. Is it petty? Yeah, probably. But after all this, I deserve some measure of satisfaction. Linda seems torn between relief that it's all finally out in the open and despair over losing everything. The kids are hovering, waiting to see which way the wind blows. So Reddit, what's next in this mess? Stay tuned, because I have a feeling the saga is far from over. Well everyone, I knew getting Linda out of this house was going to shake things up, but I didn't anticipate quite this level of fallout. Turns out, John doesn't take kindly to being cut off from his personal ATM. And turns out, Linda isn't as keen on the broke lawyer as she was on the wealthy fantasy version. First came the threats. Subtle at first, veiled messages, calls from unknown numbers at odd hours. Then it escalated. My car tires were slashed, a brick through my living room window with a charming note attached, demanding I drop the divorce proceedings and return Linda to her rightful place. I'm not going to lie, it was all quite unnerving. I went to sleep with a golf club next to my bed for the next few days. You know, just in case. But it also hardened my resolve. If John thought I was going to back down, he had seriously underestimated me. Linda, bless her easily manipulated heart, it was a mess. One minute she would be in tears blaming herself for the threats, begging me to make it stop. The next minute, she would be on the phone with John, whispering reassurances that she cared about him and would find a way out of this mess. It was maddening to see. The kids, sensing the escalating situation, tried to step in. They went to John, confronting him about his threats. Big mistake. Turns out, sweet happy-go-lucky John had a temper, a nasty one, filled with words I didn't even know existed. Apparently, he'd been playing the mild-mannered charmer routine with them too. The illusion shattered, revealing a manipulative, vindictive man who felt scorned. That confrontation was the turning point for Mia and Matthew. It finally dawned on them that their mother wasn't the sole victim in this mess. She was an active participant, and that John, the man they had welcomed into the family with open arms, wasn't some misunderstood hero, but the villain of this whole drama. This newfound clarity led to an unexpected development. Mia and Matthew, after a tearful apology for their past actions, offered their support. They realized the severity of what John might be capable of, and they were worried for me, for Linda, and even grudgingly for themselves. It was an awkward alliance, born out of necessity rather than actual familiar warmth, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely isolated. We had a common enemy, and that, at least for now, was enough to bind us. We strategized, bolstered security around the house. Thankfully, Matthew has tech-savvy friends, and have decided to keep a close watch on Linda. I even had to have some difficult conversations with her, explaining that while I understood her vulnerability, her continued contact with John was endangering us all. It wasn't easy seeing her conflicted face, torn between her misplaced love for him and the realization of his true nature. So where are we now? Honestly, I don't know. The threats have lessened for the moment, which either means John is backing off or planning something even more sinister. Linda's wavering, one day vowing to cut all ties, the next texting him back late at night. The kids are hovering, watching and waiting, their trust in their mother irrevocably broken. And me, I'm exhausted, angry, but also strangely a little bit resolute. I have a strange feeling that this is far from over. Things took a turn for the strange last week. After the lull in John's threats, I started to get this uneasy feeling, like the quiet before the storm. And boy was I right. It started with a package, left on my doorstep, no return address, just a single word scrawled into the messy handwriting. Remember. Inside was a small velvet box. My heart pounded as I opened it. Nestled within the plush lining was a single diamond earring, one of Linda's. The message was clear. John wasn't done playing his twisted games. That earring sent a chill down my spine. Was this just another intimidation tactic, or a veiled threat against Linda? Had he already hurt her? The worry ate me away, keeping me up at night, my golf club now feeling woefully inadequate as a defense. The kids, sensing my rising anxiety, stepped up again. Mia, bless her suddenly protective nature, suggested we install security cameras around the house. Matthew offered to move back in for a while, just to keep an eye on things. It was a gesture that both touched me and filled me with a sense of unease. My children shouldn't have to shoulder the burden of my marital mess. Then a few days later came the bombshell. Linda called, her voice a strange mix of fear and determination. She asked to meet me, alone, at our old coffee spot, the one we used to frequent before all this madness. Curiosity mixed with a healthy dose of apprehension got the best of me. I agreed. Sitting across from her at that old familiar table, I barely recognized the woman I'd been married to for 4 decades. Her eyes held a haunted look, and there were new lines etched around her mouth. She started with a whispered apology, admitting that she'd been weak, foolish, blinded by John's manipulative charm. But then came the real shocker. Linda confessed that John had been blackmailing her. He had some compromising photos. Photos that, if leaked, would not only ruin our reputation, but also jeopardize the kids' careers. Apparently, a certain drunken night out with John turned into more than she bargained for, and his camera was more than happy to document it. I was floored. The audacity of the man to prey on Linda's vulnerability and then use her as a pawn against me, against our own children. It was beyond despicable. It solidified the image I had of him as not just a heartless conman, but as a true sociopath. At that moment, staring at Linda's defeated face, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. All the anger and betrayal I felt towards her melted away, replaced by a grim determination to protect her, to protect our kids, to make John pay for everything he'd done. So we devised a plan, a risky one, admittedly, but at this point, we were running out of options. Linda agreed to go along with John's demands, to meet with him, to act as though everything was back to normal. Meanwhile, the kids and I would gather evidence, record conversations, and do everything in our power to expose him for the fraud and blackmailer he truly was. It's a dangerous game we're playing, walking right into the lion's den. But I'm tired of being the prey. It's time we show John exactly what happens when you mess with my family. Reddit, we did it. Well, kind of. Operation Take Down the Scumbag turned out to be a success, and it's both exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Here's the lowdown. Linda, with a trembling voice and steely determination in her eyes, played her role perfectly. She renewed contact with John, convincing him that all was forgiven. They met up at one of his favorite swanky bars, the type of place where a single cocktail costs more than my weekly groceries. I watched from a discreet distance. Wired with a hidden microphone, Mia managed to procure from a friend who dabbles in amateur theatrics. That first meeting was a masterclass in deception. Linda batted her eyelashes. John fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. He gloated about his plan, outlining exactly how he intended to use the photos to extort money from me, from the kids. He even hinted at having other compromising material, which made my blood boil. Apparently, John liked to document his conquests. What a creep. Meanwhile, Matthew was back at my house, monitoring the hidden cameras we installed. He caught some incriminating footage of John sneaking around the backyard late that same night. Whether he was trying to intimidate us further or scout for potential entry points, I don't know, but it cemented our determination to bring him down. The next stage of the plan was trickier. Linda lured John to a rented apartment under the pretense of a romantic weekend. Mia, bless her suddenly ruthless streak, insisted on helping with the setup. Candles, rose petals, the whole cheesy works. She even baked some questionable-looking cookies, laced with a mild sedative. Just enough to make John talkative and let his guard down. I waited in a van across the street, my stomach churning with nerves. Linda wore a wire, and Matthew was poised at his laptop, ready to document everything. We listened as they reminisced about old times, as John, ever the narcissist, talked about how easily he'd manipulated Linda. Then came the demands, the threats, and finally, the piece de resistance. John pulled out his phone to show off his blackmail photos. That was our cue. I hit the button on the remote Mia had rigged, and the apartment lights flickered off, replaced by a single spotlight shining on John's startled face. He barely had time to register what was happening before I burst into the room, with the kids right behind me. His face went wide with shock. The confrontation that followed was ugly. John blustered, made excuses, tried to shift the blame, and even offered a pathetic apology, but we weren't buying it. We played back the recordings, showed him the footage we had, and I made it perfectly clear the kind of legal nightmare he would face if he didn't back down. There's a certain twisted satisfaction in watching a bully crumble, and crumble he did. Whether it was out of genuine fear or the residue of those special cookies, I don't know. He agreed to delete the photos, vowed to leave Linda alone, and even whimpered something about seeking help for his issues. I doubt the sincerity of his remorse, but frankly I don't care. The threat he posed is, for now, neutralized. I must say it's a huge breath of relief to know that he won't be bothering us for a while, and we can now focus on other things, like fixing the mess that was our family. Reddit, after weeks of living in my own personal thriller movie, things seem to be quieter. Not normal exactly, but quieter. The divorce is still a mess in progress, but at least it's now restricted to civil disputes between lawyers in bland conference rooms, not midnight threats and blackmail plots. John, true to his cowardly form, disappeared after our confrontation. No attempts at revenge, no last-minute dramatic pleas. I guess even a sociopathic con man has his limits. I filed a restraining order against him anyway, just in case. You can never be too careful with people like him. The aftermath of Linda was complicated. We had spent weeks on the same side, fighting a common enemy. It had brought us closer, but not in the way we both hoped. The betrayal still stung. Trust remained a fragile thing. Yet through forced cooperation, I saw a glimmer of the woman I first fell in love with. Vulnerable, yes, but also stronger than I'd given her credit for. Mia and Matthew surprised me the most. After the initial shock, resentment and anger, they rallied around Linda too. Not excusing her behavior, but understanding the complex web of manipulation she'd been trapped in. They visited her in the small apartment she was renting, helped her unpack boxes, and even endured an excruciatingly awkward family dinner without throwing a single passive-aggressive comment. There were apologies, tearful and tentative ones. We talked, and by that I mean we actually communicated, not just exchanged accusations and justifications. It wasn't a reset button, but it was the start of something, healing maybe. A few weeks ago, Linda asked me to meet her at our old coffee shop, the same place we had that fateful meeting where the blackmail was revealed. I won't lie, stepping back into that space sent a shiver down my spine, but it was different this time. She looked me in the eye, no more excuses, no pleading. Instead, she spoke about her regrets, about letting her insecurities drive her into the arms of a toxic man, about realizing that the true strength she sought didn't lie in some fleeting infatuation, but owning her mistakes and taking responsibility for her actions. She asked for another chance, not a romantic do-over, but a chance to rebuild a relationship as co-parents, as friends, and maybe, just maybe, as something more down the line. I didn't answer her right away. This whole mess has taught me that rash decisions, hasty declarations driven by desperation, are what lands you in trouble in the first place. I told Linda that forgiveness is a process, not a single choice. And that was a wrap up for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Smash that like button for me and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again, and we'll be seeing you in the next one.